something to think about. For whom are urban spaces designed, and shouldn't we put the
Head
onus
towards
on
Roundhouse
those that bring in
Lane.
the danger instead of
Use
keeping
any
our
lane to
focus on
turn
those
left
that
onto
are
Westfield Avenue.
considered vulnerable. And obviously we need to discuss
Continue
why
for
British
3/4
people
of a
drive on the
mile.
wrong side of the road. That's for another time.
That's for my funny concluding line, thank you. Well, there goes my outro. In this episode, we've rethought how we use our streets, from getting rid of cars in some places to getting rid of speed limits and traffic lights in others. We've rethought what our streets look like when we try and make them for all users, not just people dashing from A to B, placing trees at regular intervals, breaking up endless lines of parked cars, even making sure that every road at a T-junction faces a tree. We've rethought who has legal liability in a collision between cars and pedestrians. And we've even rethought how we, well, think about our streets. The choices we make in the very words we associate with traffic, like, pedestrian. But let's finish as we began, by getting out there into our streets, or indeed, what came before them. So I'm standing here on the South Bank next to the National Theatre, looking across the brown, murky expanse of the River Thames. And I'm not seeing a huge amount of movement on it. There's some kayaks over there, a police boat, an Uber Clipper, and some pleasure boats. But we used to, in London, get from A to B on the river. And then, of course, we had to rethink things as the motorised vehicle came along. And so we had the busy Thames embankment full of buses and taxis on the north side of the river. And then we did some new rethinking and we created a cycle superhighway so you could pedal from hither to thither. And so, well, we've always been rethinking things, and we likely always will.
In 300 yards, turn left onto the A12 slip road to central London, Docklands.
Rethink was presented by Ben Ansell and produced by Phoebe Keane. If you like this one, why not catch up on the episode asking how we could rethink regeneration? You can hear it on BBC Sounds, and of course you could subscribe to the Rethink podcast and never miss an episode.
On BBC Radio 4.
It's very easy to be impressed by the culture of ancient Greece, by the art and the literature, the philosophy. But you understand a culture a lot better if you dig down to the men and women who made that possible.
Mary Beard and guests explore 5 revealing stories of everyday life in ancient Greece.
It would have been noisy and smelly and dusty.
It is this precious glimpse into an ordinary Athenian house.
Being Greek with Mary Beard starts tomorrow morning at 9. To listen on your smart speaker, just say, play Radio 4.
Well, now Radio 4, Tom Whipple with the week's latest discoveries on BBC Inside Science.
Hello! The thing about football, said the author Terry Pratchett, the important thing about football is that it is not just about football. Here at Inside Science, we agree. Don't worry, this is still a safe space, a World Cup exclusion zone, just about. For the next half hour, we have no interest here in Harry Kane's left foot, Ronaldinho's right foot, Zidane's forehead, or whatever body part is pertinent to whatever other footballer is famously good at doing ball-related things with it. But that doesn't mean we aren't into the footy. When the world gets together to watch
In
those
300
two
yards,
balls and
merge onto
foreheads,
East
to
Cross
cheer,
Route,
commiserate,
A12.
celebrate, that means only one thing. Statistical power, psychology studies at scale, science. From the epidemiology of population scale sleeplessness to the optimal game theoretical strategies in shootouts and beyond, what can we learn from football? That new segment comes later, and with it is Kit Yates, maths prof and football fan, who will be our boot boy as we choose a World Cup squad of science. Hi Kit.
Hi Tom, thanks for that.
First though, this will be the last World Cup where teams in Britain can follow the games on social media. This week, the UK government announced under 16s would soon be banned. And the kids, well, they're not all right with that, and they have questions.
I would like to know why they chose under 16s and not like under 14s or under 17s.
Are you sure the ban will really work?
As Britain follows Australia in banning teens on social media, it is, said one politician, a defining moment. It is, said one teen, A waste of time. They look forward, they said, to a future far and warm. At the University of Cambridge, and Dr. Catherine Sebastian, Head of Evidence at Wellcome. But first, we asked a group of Year 9 students at Clifton High School in Bristol what questions they have about the ban.
How long did it take for the scientists to come to the conclusion that these apps needed to be banned?
What's the thought process behind banning like communication? Because a lot of people like talk to people
There's a
using
speed camera
Snapchat and
ahead.
stuff like that.
I'm wondering if once people reach the age of 16, they might go on it even more, because it's like the forbidden thing they're now allowed to have access to.
How did the scientists come to a conclusion that like that specific app is like not safe for the young people?
Is it purely based on mental health and addiction, or is there a different factor that they're worried about?
Does social media have a different impact on our brain to adults?
My parents say I'm addicted. Will I go through withdrawal?
Do the scientists think that children's brains are developing differently to how their parents' brains did when they were kids? Do you think the way that we interact with one another change?
Amy and Kat, welcome. Amy, there's lots of fascinating questions asked there by those students, but I think the biggest question of all is, what's the evidence so far?
I think there's different ways to look at evidence in this space. Naturally, technology is really fast moving and companies don't provide a lot of access to data or resources to test the impacts and the safety. So I think evidence is evolving. We have pretty good evidence that it has harmed individual young people, right? Coroners have found that some young people have died partially because of what content they've been exposed to on social media. Individual harm of severe harm is enough to cause major policy change. In those studies with young adults, we do see that there's much better evidence of reduction in social media use leading to improvements in well-being. While abstinence from social media completely, the evidence is still much more mixed and difficult to interpret.
What about wider population correlations? I mean, how much of this is, I know scientists are incredibly wary about things
There's
like
a speed
causality,
camera
but how
ahead.
much of this is simply looking at two graphs, one of which is social media use and the other is teen mental health?
Yes, you're right. We've seen teen mental health decline from the time that social media or smartphones were released. And actually, there was a similar time, there was an economic crash. There's been a lot of other changes going on, and there's been a lot of debate what they say or what not. We wouldn't expect evidence to be great, just given the lack of the raw materials for proper science to be done. And so I think it's critical for us not to just talk about is there evidence or is there not, but what are the risks of different options? What's the risk of saying there potentially isn't an impact when in 5 years we find out that there has been? And I think that helps policymakers make those judgments. I think in this space, there'll always have to be gambles, policy gambles based on the best evidence available.
And you're currently involved in efforts to get evidence. Talk us through what you're doing.
There's a speed camera ahead.
World first trial up in Bradford where thousands of school children will be randomized in whole school year groups to either just use social media as they did before or to be given a curfew on their social media use and a reduction. And that will happen in the fall, and the plan was that in early 2027 we could then give some of that really important causal evidence or leading onto that causal evidence around whether social media might be impacting young people and how that intervention works.
So a randomised controlled trial, that's rather than making a big population difference where you don't know whether teen mental health has changed because of the financial crash in 2008 or the iPhone in 2008, you can say it is this thing. Will you be able to get an answer before they're all banned from using social media?
So we will do it all in the autumn and be done by December.
Kat, you're
In a quarter of a mile, use the left lane to take the A13 slip road to Docklands.
What's your take on this? What is Wellcome hoping to now get from the UK ban? What's going on there?
Yeah, so Wellcome's one of the largest global funders of mental health research, and the digital world is a massive part of everyday life for young
Use
people.
the left lane to take the A13 slip
We
road.
actually got involved in this space, funding as well that Amy talked about, because we really wanted to move the evidence beyond the associational evidence.
In 200 yards, use any lane to turn left onto East India Dock Road,
social media is
A13.
actually causal for mental health problems, and really try and unpick whether social media restriction is something that could actually help.
Use any lane to turn left onto East India Dock Road, A13.
Where something's happening in the whole population all at once, along with a load of other things that are unrelated that are happening in the population all at once. So how do you possibly get data where you can tell the rest of the world, yes, this works, or no, it turns out it makes people's lives even worse?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that's why there's still tremendous value in studies like the IRL trial, which
in a quarter of a mile, use the right lane to take the A13 slip road to Tilbury, Barking.
Once a ban comes in for the UK as a whole, you won't be able to have that nice controlled design, but there are other methods that you can use to try and infer what the effects of the ban might be. For example, we might fund cohort studies which follow up thousands of young people over time. Many of them have got decades worth of data from young people, often from birth, and we would fund them to collect baseline mental health measures before the ban is implemented, and then follow up young people over time. And then it's not ideal for causality because there isn't a control condition, but you can use modelling techniques to control for variables and look at pathways to understand not only if the ban is effective, but if so, why that might be. So you can look at variables that might be of interest to mental health, like sleep. So for example, is the ban on social media meaning that young people are sleeping more? Are they interacting with their friends more? So for us, it's really important that we understand, is the ban effective? Is it acting as it's intended? Are there in fact any unintended consequences that are harmful to young people? But also, if it is effective, what are the mechanisms or pathways by which it might be having an effect?
What are the sort of outcome variables that we'd like to look at? Because mental health isn't one thing, and it might not be the same thing for different groups of people.
Well, I think the first thing is to think about what outcome variables really matter. And I think here, the ban is really marketed in a way as a silver bullet for a lot of different issues. So we're talking about mental health and well-being, but outcomes, bullying, health, eye health, sleep. And so the first bit is actually thinking about what does success look like. I don't know, Kat, if you want to discuss different populations as well.
Yeah, it's really important to understand not just the average effect, but as you say, Tom, there might be minorities where there's a particular impact. So we're interested in studying, for example, young people who are already experiencing mental health problems. Is the effect different for those young people living in urban versus rural environments? For example, those in isolated
use the right lane to take the A13 slip road, then keep left to continue on Newham Way.
We're interested in minoritized groups such as those from LGBTQ plus populations, because we know that young people from those groups might use social media for social support in particular. And so I think, as well as the quantitative
keep left
measures
to continue
that we
on
might
Newham
look
Way.
at, so questionnaire measures of mental health or measures of what people are doing on their screens at any given moment, we also want to look at the quality
continue
of data
on A13
from
for
young
6
people
miles.
and find out how the ban is affecting them in their own words.
At the beginning of this, we heard a whole bunch of questions from teenagers who are about to be banned from social media. I think we answered a few of them, but by no means all of them, or come even close. Do you want the same answers? Do you have the same answers? What did you make of them?
I mean, I think a theme that came through really clearly, if social media is being taken away, how will that affect them? There was a really interesting question about, is it really addictive? Will I experience withdrawal symptoms? I think there's also a really interesting piece to be done around what young people will be doing with their time instead. I think from what I've heard, the perception that with the social media ban, something might be being taken away, what is going to be put in its place. Amy talked earlier about a cultural shift. What does that actually mean? So yeah, a lot of questions. Also, why the age of 16 has been chosen. I think that's a really interesting question. I think any age that would be chosen would be to some extent arbitrary. In the UK it's 16, I believe in France it's 15. So to some extent the choice is a social one as much as a scientific one. I think to the extent that we do have evidence, we know that the adolescent brain is still developing. These are formative years, that young people are particularly susceptible to mental health problems, with half of mental health problems emerging by the age of 18. And so I imagine that this underpins some of the decision to choose 16, but I would by no means say that this is 100% a scientific decision. It is a social one as well.
Thanks much.
Thank you.
Kit, you know about stats. You also, I think, know about having children. Where do you stand on the stats of mental health and social media and everything else?
I mean, personally, I struggle with social media a bit myself. I find some of the best bits of other people's lives, you know, it was always their life is a bit difficult. I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. I know we've made a conscious choice not to let them use social media, and I think maybe the social media ban will make that choice easier for other parents.
Now, having looked into the black soul of the internet, is there anything darker? There is. And with that completely seamless segue, sometimes language fails us. Sometimes you think you know what a word means, a word like colour, or distance, or black. Then you see ultra black. One of those blacks contending to be the blackest black. And none of those words feel adequate anymore. It is, said the artist Anish Kapoor, blacker than anything you can imagine. So black, you almost can't see it. You lose orientation, he added. You lose time. What can we do with these blacks, these uncanny paints developed by nature and now developed by humans that challenge our ideas of colour and dimension? Well, naturally, one of the first applications, one of the first great scientific quests in the new science of ultra black has been trying to get them onto overpriced luxury cars. This week, a paper published in the journal Matter and Light described a practical paint that uses carbon nanotubes to absorb 99.9% of light. And you can stick it on a Ferrari, at last. Mark Miodownik, Professor of Materials and Society at University College London, told us how they did it and why it mattered.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing colour, which is very special to us humans, in that it absorbs all of the wavelengths that fall on it. So it's kind of the absence of any other colour, I suppose. So if you think about the light, it's made of electromagnetic spectrum. So we have, you know, the colours of the rainbow. They're all different wavelengths, and we also have on either end, invisible to us, our human eyes, the infrared and the ultraviolet. And black, you know, when all those wavelengths fall on it, black pigments absorb them all. So you get almost nothing back. In fact, in a perfect black, you would get nothing back.
So the black that I'm used to looking at in my life is in reality reflecting a little bit of light. So talk to me about ultra blacks. What are these and how are they doing what they do?
We get used to blacks kind of being this contrast between, you know, of the world that we live in, and so other colours are bright because they have a black background or they're near a black. But then people start to get really interested in like the quality of black, like how black could we get? And from a scientific perspective, that's very interesting because there's lots of applications to having a black that absorbs everything. But from a kind of aesthetic perspective, you know, it changes actually the way that we see say blue or red or green, and the chemical in the black pigment has a high absorption of that wavelength and will convert it to heat. But some of it gets scattered, some of it does get reflected back, and so that's what you see with normal black pigments. The blackest black pigments, what they do is the shape of the pigment means that the reflection doesn't come straight back. It ping-pongs around the pigment, and every time it ping-pongs around, a little bit more of it gets absorbed. And actually it absorbs most of the rest of it in heat, so it basically converts light into heat. And the more those pigments can be designed to ping-pong around, the deeper the black goes. So this is called structural absorption. So this is very, very tiny, like you can think of it as a set of caves. Once the light gets into one of these caves, it's ping-ponging around until it basically just becomes heat in the end.
And this latest paper that we're looking at, it's not a paint that is quite the blackest that we have, but the advance here is to find a way to make those caves but do so in a practical fashion so you can start putting it on fancy cars.
Yeah, these caves are made with carbon nanotubes, so this is a famous one object like a house or a car. But of course, then as soon as everyone heard about this is the blackest black, people got very excited. And so the whole world, as always actually with science discoveries, the whole world of design got really interested in art and wanted to use this black is black. But how do you use it practically? The trick is, of course, that you know, as anyone knows who's ever
In
painted
50
anything,
yards
that
at the
it's
roundabout,
density of the
take the
pigments
third
that
exit
really
onto
gives
the
you that
A13
depth
slip
of
road to
hue.
M25,
So
Tilbury.
anyone who goes for cheap house paint
In a
when
quarter
they're
of a
doing up
mile,
their house,
turn right
and
onto
that
Upney
really
Lane.
knows the difference. Like, it's the density of pigments that you're trying to get onto an object via spraying. So we're talking about density of carbon nanotubes, but they also have to be connected into this cave-like structure. So how do you get a spray to do that, to self-assemble it onto let's say a car bonnet? And that has been the kind of quest. So it's the fine chemistry and mechanics of doing that has been solved here.
Is there a point to this? Might there be applications elsewhere?
Oh, there's definitely a
Turn
lot of
right onto
applications
Upney
in things
Lane,
like
then turn right
telescopes
onto
and
Meadow
any sort of
Road.
camera where you want to capture stray light that you don't want to go down the lens. So anything that you want to reduce glare on, these ultra blacks are perfect, right? So that's there's a lot of applications, and they do tend to be very high-end, high expensive equipment. So maybe you don't need a spray-on technology like this. But again, you know, that is kind of the way it works. This is a classic example of blue skies research, or you might say dark skies research, which created a pigment just for the sake of it, just to see if you could do it. And actually now is kind of finding its way into the world, and who knows where it will end up next.
That was Mark Miodownik. We love hearing from you at Inside Science. Send us any ideas about what we should be covering on insidescience@bbc.co.uk. Now,
sensational in the second half. What an unbelievable moment. Goes to shot it. Gets his hat-trick. What a story. What a story. It's king of them all. Champions of the world's greatest game.
the beautiful game. The game of two halves. The game with the ball and the people and the one man who's allowed to use his hands. Or something like that. Fear not! Despite the incisiveness of my analysis, you have not accidentally switched on 5 Live. Over the next month, it is our firm pledge not to tell you anything useful or insightful about the World Cup. Instead, we are interested in the useful and insightful things the World Cup can tell us about us. When football fans see crowds gathering to watch the game, they see a sublime gladiatorial contest of human excellence or some such. Scientists, they see an opportunity to study crowds and psychology at scale. So over the next month, we're going to use that to make our own World Cup squad, a World Cup squad of science. And I am to be its Thomas Tuchel, the science manager. Joining me is Kit Yates. You can think of him as like the guy who cuts up the oranges, but nevertheless, I've allowed you to do your own talent spotting, and I think you found a promising striker in the big leagues of the American Economic Review.
Yeah, so I want to tell you about penalty shootouts, and the paper is called Testing Mixed Strategy Equilibria When Players Are Heterogeneous, the Case of Penalty Kicks in Soccer. So as a mathematician, what I like about penalties is that all the complexities of the game are stripped away. So penalty taking is really pure, simple sort of game between the taker and the keeper. And so from a scientific point of view, it makes it an ideal part of the game to analyse. Unfortunately, there is this branch of mathematics known as game theory, which is dedicated to understanding these simple sorts of competitions. So game theorists would call taking a penalty a zero-sum game. For the taker to score, the keeper has to concede, and for the keeper to come out on top, they have to either save the shot or rely on the taker missing. But either way, there's only one winner, so it's a zero-sum game. So the game theorists in this paper, they use a simple model of penalty taking where they just think about 3 options for the placement of the penalty: to the left, to the right, or down the middle, and the same 3 options that the keeper can use to attempt to save. And they also assume that both the taker and the keeper make up their minds about what their strategy is going to be well in advance, which isn't a terrible assumption, it's not always true. But then they can say something about penalty taking strategy. And what they suggest is what game theory predicts is that no single strategy, like always aim to the right, is going to be optimal because it's predictable. We see keepers nowadays with notes on their water bottles about which way the taker is likely to hit their penalty. So to avoid that predictability, the optimal strategy to use, game theoretically at least, is what they would call a mixed strategy, where the player deliberately introduces unpredictability or randomness into their decision making to prevent the opponents from exploiting patterns. So this would mean taking a bit different sides, left, right, middle, each time. And so the study that I'm presenting to you is one that actually looked at the data in two of Europe's top leagues, in France and Italy, and found that rather than favouring one side of the goal, penalty takers did indeed choose randomly between kicking to the left, to the right, or down the middle, consistent with this game theoretic mixed strategy.
And I think this is in contrast to less...
To put very high different aspects of colour into them, because you get these reflective surfaces that...
After the news, Tom Sutcliffe will discuss the dangers of life online and how individuals and societies can fight back. He'll be joined by 3 guests who are investigating the digital sphere and in some cases resisting its ubiquity. Start the week...
Terrorist.
The anger was justified. That action was not.
Friend or foe.
There was a fundamental difference around approaches.
I'm Justin Rowlatt, BBC climate editor. I'm looking at how the modern green movement has been shaped by conflict and the clash of ideas.
It was very, very emotional.
10 fights that made the green movement on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds. Weekday afternoons starting next Monday at 1:45.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. Andy Burnham has confirmed he plans to stand to replace Sir Keir Starmer, who's announced his resignation as Prime Minister following days of speculation. Mr Burnham was sworn in as an MP in the Commons this afternoon after winning the Makerfield by-election last week. So far, he's the only candidate to throw his hat in the ring to be the next Labour leader. The Labour MP Alex Sobel believes the contest isn't necessary.
I think a battle of ideas is always welcome. So, I think if people can set out a pitch, if other people can set out a pitch that is convincing enough, then we should definitely have one. But if people are coming forward with the same things that we tried and failed for the last 2 years, then I don't think that is worthwhile. But if people need to be imaginative and bold, then I think it's worth doing.
A 36-year-old man has appeared in court charged with 5 counts of attempted murder linked to terrorism following a series of alleged anti-Muslim attacks in Edinburgh. 5 people were hurt at various locations on Friday night. Lewis Hawkes made no plea and was remanded in custody. The former Democratic Unionist Party leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, has been found guilty of 18 historical child sex offences, including 1 count of rape, after 2 women accused him of sexually assaulting them as children. The judge said he faces a lengthy prison term when he's sentenced in September. The United States has said it'll suspend sanctions on 2 Iranian oil production and exports for 60 days, as the 2 countries hold talks about a possible peace deal. The US Treasury said Tehran had agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz and allow nuclear inspectors back into the country. Astronomers say a comet, which passed through the orbit of Mars last year, could have been the oldest object ever to visit the solar system. Measurements from the James Webb Space Telescope indicate the interstellar object, called 3I Atlas, was formed more than 10 billion years ago. It's since disappeared back into outer space. BBC News.
Later this hour, Mary Burke concludes her exploration of our community of carers. Tonight, speaking to guests about how being a carer has affected them and how they deal with the seemingly inevitable burnout. That's at 9:45. But now Radio 4, time for Start the Week with Tom Sutcliffe.
Hello. We are connected together as never before in human history, using the same social networks to communicate with people we know and people we don't across the globe. And yet it can seem that we've never been further apart. That's what we're talking about today, what technology has done to our world for good and ill, how complacent we are about our dependency on fragile technological systems, how to fight back against online harm and online hate, and the colossally rich corporations that too often enable them. With me are the filmmaker and activist Vivian Kidron, Baroness Kidron of Angel, who shares the fruits of years of campaigning for better protection of children online in her book Users. The business journalist and writer Catherine Dunn, whose book Little Blue Dot gives us a history of that everyday bit of magic, the global positioning system. and the writer Meena Kandasamy, who has written a ferocious, funny novel about deepfake porn and the Indian manosphere, fieldwork as a sex object. Bevan, if I can start with you remind us at the very beginning of your book that the internet started with utopian dreams. Rather poignantly, you quote an early enthusiast who imagines a world where anyone anywhere may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced into silence or conformity. It didn't quite work out that way. Did people let the internet down, or did the internet let us down?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, I think the reason I started there is because it's very easy, if you're arguing that we have to contain some of it, some of the way that it is managed and governed, to be a tech detractor. But actually, I love technology, and the promise was so great. I think the real truth of what happened was that the technology itself got captured by commercial forces. And I explain in the book, there are 1, 2, 3 different moments at which that capture takes place. And every time it gets captured, 2 things happen. One is someone out there gets very, very rich. And the other thing is that we lose control of what it is to become. And I think that one of the stories of the internet is really that it was made with public money, largely American taxpayer money. It was often created for military purposes. And then when it comes out into the world, it's captured by people who see the commercial opportunity rather than the social opportunity.
You talk at the beginning in the book again of the tech sector's tobacco moment. The analogy being with the tobacco industry, and that moment they had to face up to the consequences of what they'd done. Isn't one of the problems here that analogy doesn't quite work? Because the cigarettes in this case are absolutely vital to our lives, very useful to our lives. They're indispensable in many ways. We can't simply give them up.
No, I think the tobacco moment is something slightly different, which is that for decades the tobacco lobbyists kept on hiding what it was doing and saying it's a question of freedom, it's a question of personal responsibility. And then it changed, and what happened was we got court case after court case of them saying who knew what when, who knew it was bad for you and sat on that information. And the court cases, the tobacco moment as it was when it stopped being about personal responsibility and became about corporate responsibility. And over the last few months, that's what we've seen in America. What we've seen is, as part of the court cases, we've had disclosure, and now we know the tech companies know it's hurting us.
What was it that they knew? What are those mechanisms that you write about that as it were, make